Welcome back. Well, the South African Human Rights Commission is looking into the comments made by a woman from Benoni who compared black males to pit bulls and said they should be murdered during a racial outburst. To discuss whether this outburst qualifies as hate speech and whether the Constitution is effective in the fostering of tolerance and the embracing of diversity in our society, we're joined by legal analyst Dr. Felix Dube. Dr. Dube, thank you so much for your time and thank you for joining us on our program this morning. So we have this leaked audio recording, and it does seem that the South African Human Rights Commission has been presented with prima facie evidence, at least, of some form of hate speech. But not all of these cases are clear and straightforward. What sort of processes are we looking to see coming forward in the time ahead?
Good morning, Togozo and the viewers. Just to say, I'm struggling a bit to hear you clearly. Would you mind perhaps to repeat what you said?
Not at all. I was wondering, the South African Human Rights Commission has already been presented with evidence, or at least prima facie evidence of hate speech. But what can we expect moving forward in terms of this case?
Oh, okay, thank you so much, Togozo, and apologies about that tech issue. So, in my view, this is one of those incredibly difficult issues to discuss, not only because they evoke emotions, but also it is so easy to be understood in them. But the test that has to be done in order to determine whether there has been an offense here, I think it is found in Section 10 of the Equality Act, which is also known as the Buddha, which says that no person may publish, propagate, advocate, or communicate words based on one or more of the prohibited grounds against any person, and if such words could be construed reasonably to demonstrate a clear intention to be hurtful, to be harmful, or to incite harm against a particular group. But now, if we look at this case, we have to really go back and ask ourselves, what is the international context for that which has been said? And I think we find that in the Genocide Convention, because if we look at it just generally from the South African perspective, we may not fully understand it. So what the Genocide Convention says, it prohibits any act which is intended to do or incite harm that could bring about the physical destruction of a particular population. So if you are killing men, as she has said, then you are actually committing a genocidal act. If you are preventing women from breeding by removing their wombs, then you are committing a genocidal act. So going back to South Africa, we have this legislation, which is the Buddha, which is intended to prevent such acts. And I think there have been a number of cases where these issues have been dealt with. So at the end of the day, it will really come down to the intention. What was the intention of communicating those words? And what was the context in which they were communicated? And who communicated them to whom and for what intention?
I mean, Dr. Dube, we know that, facts play a key role when it comes to proving allegations of racism, as you've just explained for us. In this instance, there is a leaked audio recording. The individual who's facing the potential charge here, their voice can be heard in the audio recording saying these horrific words and sentiments. Surely this makes it a straightforward case.
Yes, definitely. This is a very, very straightforward case. I don't think there is a dispute about it, but there are always legal tricks to get around such things. So at the end of the day, to preserve the integrity of the legal system, those allegations have to be proven. It has to be shown that she has communicated them and that she did so with the intent that is portrayed in those words. So it is not one of those difficult cases where you have to really struggle to pin down the person. It's so easy to do.
Right. I mean, there's been a lot of debate around, the criminalization of racism, especially in the sort of months leading up to the promulgation of the act itself. Talk to us about, some of the difficulties that legalese come across when faced with cases like this, where the sort of subjective intention of the accused needs to be proven, and that burden then lies on the state.
Yes. The state eventually, or any person who actually pursues this matter, will have to actually prove that these words were communicated by this person and that this was the intention. And I think on this one, it's not really a difficult one. It is very straightforward. What really needs to be determined is whether those words can actually be construed to be racist, can they be construed to be hate speech, and do they portray any intention to physically harm or degrade or ravage the dignity of the persons against whom they have been directed. So in this case, it has been very clear. The intention has been communicated that we need to kill black men. We need to remove the capacity of black women to breathe. So this is actually intended to bring about the physical destruction of black people as a group in South Africa, not just one person. And I find it incredibly shocking that this whole thing was said in the context of the debate about dogs. So somebody is willing to retain a dog, but willing to actually destroy the whole black population. So that tells you a lot about the conditions of black people in South Africa in general and across the world in particular. So this one is not a very difficult thing. I think it can be proven with ease.
Yeah, I think there's also a lot of curiosity in terms of, sentencing in cases like these. An individual makes some sort of racist statement or sentiment. They're eventually found guilty, but then they're, given some sort of a fine. They're slapped with a fine or a short term of imprisonment. How does the state weigh, the severity of the words and the harm that was inflicted by the racist utterances with an equivocal sort of just response by the state in punishing that individual for said sentiments?
Thank you for that one. So there is a difficulty on that one. The reason being that such utterances, they ravage the dignity of people. They make people feel less of who they are. And they can actually provide a context for people who want to destabilize the nation, to mobilize against such people and to even mobilize against democratic institutions themselves. So the state has to act in order to protect the peace and in order to redeem itself. But then you recall that the police and the prosecutors can only go so far as bringing those matters to court. At the end of the day, it is usually up to the magistrates and the judges to decide which sentences to impose. And there are many factors that they consider. And if you take into account personal discretion on the part of judges, it's really difficult because most of those people will get just a slap on the wrist and then they go on their way. I'll give you a few examples. You remember the case of Penny Sparrow. She was fined 5,000 rand and then given a 2-year imprisonment term that was suspended for 5 years on the condition that she doesn't commit the offense again. And then there was a further fine of 150,000 to be paid to an NGO that was in that area. So if you look at it, the monies look big and the sentence was suspended. So at the end of the day, this person actually just got away with it. And then I think last year we dealt with the issue of Vicky Mombe. You remember that lady who insulted a policeman and she called him the K word. She was fined 10,000 rand in order to make a public apology and committed to sensitivity training. There was no sentencing for that. So she didn't feel any restraint on her life for such utterances. But then you remember that even if some of these words are said, even if they may be offensive, it is not always the case that they can be described as racist or they can be described as hateful speech. The reason being that if you publish or express any word or opinion that is generally intended to be of artistic creativity, right, or which is of academic and scientific inquiry and which is fair and accurate, then you are going to escape that. And I think the latest case that we had is that one of the CIC for 2019, when
right,
the Human Rights Commission found that some of his utterances were offensive, but they did not constitute racism or hate speech.
Right. Well, Dr. Dube, thank you so much for coming onto the program this morning and sharing your insights with us there. I think that's definitely going to be an ongoing conversation, at least until, as we follow developments with regards to the arrest of Belinda Migo. Well, that was our legal analyst, Dr. Felix Dube. Up next is